There's reality, and then there's the media narrative. According to some news outlets, Marco Rubio and Bernie Sanders were the big winners in Iowa, even though they lost. How the media frames this race is a big bone of contention with Donald Trump, and he may have a point. There's no missing the media presence in New Hampshire. They've moved lock, stock, and barrel into places like the Radisson in Manchester, WGBH included.
Thank you so much. Yeah, sure.
They obsessively check social media to see what everyone else is saying. And everyone's seeking a narrative. The one out of Iowa dismissed the real winners. But worse for Republican race leader Donald Trump, his second-place finish was called a humiliation.
He was supposed to win, and he didn't win. You can call it humiliation, you can call it an unexpected loss. It all depends what kind of news organization you are.
Veteran political reporter Andy Hiller of WHDH says, yeah, the media does control the message, to a point.
The media does shape the race. Donald Trump doesn't like the way it's being shaped in some ways, but he loves the polls. And where do the polls come from? The polls come from the media.
One-time Republican Party Chair Michael Steele, now a commentator for MSNBC, says the media is definitely trying to control the narrative by being tougher on all the candidates this time around.
Not just, the left-wing media, it's media generally. The public is like, we're going to make this decision on our own. We appreciate you trying to share the narrative or tell the story, but we got this.
And Steele says the media is using old tactics in a new world.
And that's what happens when you have an asymmetrical political process with a media that's trying to cover it in a conventional way.
Funny, Andy Hiller says the campaigns haven't gotten with the times either.
I believe that technology has outrun the campaigns. Trump wins on social media. In fact, he's one of the only ones who really plays it. Everybody else is playing attack ads and news conferences and events and town meetings and debates. They're old.
So everything is old. What else is new? One of the things that Michael Steele said was, and I started thinking about this, that in 2008 in particular, and 2012 to a certain extent, the media was a little bit soft on Obama. They liked him, especially in 2008. And this time around, it's not quite so obvious, who likes who. And he really believes that everybody's been tougher. I think Donald Trump isn't the only one who doesn't like the way this narrative is shaking down. He's the only one complaining. I'm sure Hillary Clinton didn't like it. You know darn well that Ted Cruz didn't like it because they're calling Marco Rubio the winner. Yes, exactly. So I think he's got a point there.
Well, yeah, but I don't see anything really that's new. The whole idea about the primaries, it's always about expectations. And you've got to beat expectations. That's what Iowa is. There have been campaign years when, and I think it was '96, when you had the Tom Harkin, who was the incumbent senator from Iowa, and he was running for president.
92, right?
Was it 92? I guess
so,
it was 92. And Bill Clinton didn't even bother to campaign in Iowa because the expectations were that Tom Harkin was going to win. But then you get into the New Hampshire primary where he became known as the comeback kid, and everybody forgets that Paul Tsongas won the '92 primary. So the whole idea that that somehow it's different, that the media talks about expectations which are rooted often in polls over time, as well as resources spent. There's nothing new about that, so why?
Well, except for in the beginning, the media gave Donald Trump 0 in the expectation department, and suddenly they had to do a 180 on that.
Well, we
but
did.
the polls.
I'm really glad you mentioned the polls, because one thing, I've been reading criticisms of the media trying to shape an artificial narrative in the wake of Iowa, and I don't think that enough people realize that the narrative we create is frequently rooted in reality. In Iowa, when you look at how Bernie Sanders was doing back in the fall, he was nowhere near Hillary Clinton. So the fact that he got a virtual tie out of Iowa, it's actually a big deal. Without those poll numbers, the narrative might be spurious, but we have the poll numbers, and I think the narrative is legit. As for Trump, I've seen him a couple times in action, so have you. He starts out every rally or speech talking about how great his polls are. I'm doing great in Iowa. I'm going to win Iowa. Ted Cruz is behind me by so much in Iowa. So if there's a backlash because he fell short and now he's being characterized as a loser, he should look in the mirror and blame himself before the media.
You know, one more thing, though, on the polls also have determined who gets to be on center stage on those debates, and that reinforces the idea about what the expectations are supposed to be.
The media did that because they did
That's
national
true.
polls instead of state polls. They didn't care what New Hampshire polls said or Iowa polls. They decided who took the stage. That's new.
True.
That's new.
Yeah.
I actually wrote about this at WGBHnews.org, and you could tell within 5 minutes of the end of after the caucus night that Rubio and Bernie Sanders are going to be proclaimed the two big winners. I find it interesting that Adam refers to the finish between Sanders and Clinton as a virtual tie. Believe me, if Clinton had come in a little bit behind Bernie Sanders instead of vice versa, no one would be describing it as a virtual tie.
It would be a landslide.
They would say it was a landslide. Hillary lost.
Yeah.
I mean, the media always loves dumping
The
on
underdog,
the Clintons.
yes, true.
They always do. When she finished third in Iowa 8 years ago, that you could just see the glee on the part of the national media.
Yeah.
So what I would say is that the media is slow to catch up on what's new. So I would say that it wasn't that they were soft on Obama. They were just trying to, wow, who is this? This would be new. Wouldn't that be something if this black guy actually made it? So that's where that was coming from. Like, who is he? How does this work? And how are they responding? And oh my God, he won Iowa. So it was like that. That I don't necessarily interpret that as soft. That was just sort of like, whoa. And so now you have a really kind of a similar situation on the Republican side with all these non-traditional, a little bit on the Democratic side, these non-traditional candidates, and they're trying to figure out, well, where is the hook? There's usually a hook that we can have that everybody agrees is the hook, that is the media narrative, and every time you settle on one, it gets blown up either by one of these non-traditional candidates or by just the changing of the times. So you can't. So we're all over the place right now trying to figure out what the hook is. I think it makes it more interesting in some way, and in a lot of ways it makes us behind the times by not actually being on top of those changes as they happen. So that as Bernie Sanders was coming up and people kept saying to us, the people, hey, you're not paying attention to this guy, all of a sudden we're surprised months later when he's shooting up through the polls in Iowa and elsewhere.
I got to make one more point about Trump. One of the fascinating things about his campaign is that from the very beginning, with that kickoff speech where he talked about Mexicans in offensive ways, Mexican immigrants, he has said and done so many things that look like they would lead to his demise as a candidate. And it's never happened. He's gone up and up and up. So what we saw in Iowa, it was the first time that he'd sort of slipped back. And again, given the pattern that preceded it, I think it's reasonable to craft the narrative that we have.